this is somewhat repetitive month to month to month, but I think it's highly valuable. When I look at my beekeeping and trying to keep my goal, and everybody's goal is to try to keep their bees alive, right? Really, that's the most important thing I would say in beekeeping is do whatever management you wish to do. And there's lots of ways to manage your bees, but at the end of the day, you want your colonies to survive year after year after year. You don't want a sick colony that's spreading disease that dies that then you need to restart the following year. Does it happen? Of course. Does everyone have some colony loss? Of course, but that should not be the goal. The goal is to be healthy bees. Just like if you had chickens or you had cows or whatever, kids do what's necessary to keep them alive. They're a living creature. Yes, they are an insect, but they're a living creature. So no, back. Don't try to speed me along, Sir Mark. So there's four things to assess when you open your hive. The first thing to assess is how many bees are in the hive. Do you have 2 frames of bees? Do you have 7 frames of bees? Do you have 20 frames of bees? And the reason why you need to know how many bees is you have to decide how big the house should be. This I don't think gets a big enough attention, and I think it's important. Small colony, small house. Big colony, bigger house. If you have a big colony in a small house, it's going to swarm. If you have a small colony in a big house, it's going to be robbed out or get sick. So you're always sort of assessing the size of your colony and adjusting the size of your box, your hive to match it. Don't be afraid to go small, right? So people say, I'm hopeful, right? It's like the hopeful super or the hopeful brood box. You should know when you make a decision it's going to work. You shouldn't be hopeful about it, because if you put on more space trying to be hopeful, more than likely it's going to fail on some level. So anyway, brood. It's always good to, if you work with Jeff Eckel, when he comes out and does your inspection, the only thing he wants to see in that hive is 2 or 3 frames of brood. He doesn't care how many supers you have. He doesn't care really about anything else. He wants to look at 3 frames of brood. Why does he want to look at 3 frames of brood? Because he wants to know if you're queen right. He wants to know if you have any disease. He wants to look at the larvae. He wants to look at the capped brood. He wants to see if your hive is well or not. And that's really any hive inspection. You should be trying to look at 2 or 3 frames of brood to get assessment on, are you queen right? And are you dealing with any disease? Food, bees need food to survive. It's pretty simple, right? This is pretty simple stuff, but it's easy when you get into a hive, you get overwhelmed or you're rushing and you're not paying attention to these things. You should make an assessment of food. All year round, bees need food to survive, right? And bees need food. The factory is to make brood. The colony's always trying to make brood for the most part, because without brood, the colony dies. Brood cycle has to continue. The bee population has to continue. It's only 6 weeks, right? If you cut off brood production for 3 weeks, your population is half the amount it's going to be 6 weeks later. And if it doesn't have food, what happens? The population gets shut off, right? So you always want to make an assessment of food. When you're starting a new colony, you want to make sure it has enough food. When you're harvesting and you're post-harvest, you want to make sure you have enough food in the colony, and especially right now as we go into winter, you want to make sure you have enough food, because the nectar source is pretty much done. If anyone's looked at the hives over the last 2 or 3 days, what do you see? Nothing, unless you have some really smart bees who found a source like a stack of boxes that were left out that are being robbed. Pretty much, there's not much forage left out there right now, and it's going to get less and less. So you're going to see that the colony activity coming in and out of the hives is down because there's no forage. There's very little forage out there. So over the next 2 or 3 weeks, obviously, this is your window to get the food up for the hive. So you want to be out there seeing what your food sources are. And then disease. You really should know your monthly mite counts. I'm not going to get into this today because I don't have 30 minutes. I only have 5 minutes, 10 minutes. So, but you may think you're okay because I've used this mite treatment or that mite treatment. You don't know that unless you check. Now, more experienced beekeepers may not need to do mite levels. They can go in and look for signs of whether or not their hive is being infected by mites earlier on, potentially. But the best way to know is do your monthly mite counts. And if your monthly mite counts are higher than 2%, the likelihood that you're going to have disease in that hive goes up, right? The higher the mite counts, the more likely you are to have disease. The goal of your mite management is always to keep your mite levels below a certain threshold. Don Coates is here. Don taught me many years ago that every hive is sick. It's just a matter of how sick is that hive. You're not going to have a hive that has no sickness in it, whether or not it be 0 mites or zero nosema or zero deformed wing virus, if you do PCR on every single one of your hives, you're going to have a certain amount of disease in each hive, right, Don? How sick is normal? Thank you. That was the quote. I couldn't remember. How sick is normal, right? And one of the ways to keep your hive from over from crossing that threshold to when it's no longer normal is to know your mites and manage your mites. It's the number one, number two, and number three thing you probably can do as a beekeeper is to know your mite count. And then if your mite count's over that threshold, do something about it. And that's all for mites. So there's 4 things you need to inspect: bees, brood, food, disease, match the hive size to the colony size, recognize a queenless colony and intervene early, feed if necessary, and do your mite count. So for me, what is my October management considerations? Like, I'm going out to do bees later on today and tomorrow. So what am I doing? You got to make a decision how you're going to overwinter. Are you going to, what is the hive configuration that you're going to overwinter in? My goal personally is to overwinter in 1 deep. That's my goal for my beekeeping and how I want to manage my hives to survive. Now, you can do 1 deep, you could do 2 deeps, you could do 2 mediums, you could do 3 mediums, you could do a deep and a medium. I think anything more than 2 deeps or the equivalent of 2 deeps or 3 mediums is probably too much for them in the winter. I see some heads shaking right there, but that's okay. I think it's too much space. Why? Because the bees have to heat that space. Why ask them to heat more than they need to heat? The heating the cluster is going to, you can leave more space on your hive if your space is full of sugar water or honey, honestly, right? So if you're leaving space that the frames are empty, don't leave that space. If you want to leave 2 deeps and 2 mediums and it's all full of honey, go ahead. You know what I mean? Like, that's something that you can do. I personally think that any space larger than 2 deeps is more space than the colony needs to make it through the winter. Combine if not queen right. If you're not queen right now, it's probably not going to survive the winter. Your population's probably lower. Unless you have a critical population, you're probably not going to survive the winter. You can combine it now, you can shake it out now, or you can let it be and see whether or not it survives right now. But things that aren't queen right are probably not going to make it. And Russ is going to tell you what to do if you're not queen right. Now's the time to feed. I think my hives need to have somewhere between 40 and 50 pounds of food in it to survive the winter. Could you do more than that? Sure, you could do more food than that, but that's pretty much what I'm trying to get. If my hive doesn't have 40 or 50 pounds of food on it, I will probably feed 2 to 1 to get it to that weight. Now, there are exceptions to that. If I'm dealing, like, for example, out at the apiary yard where we have our 18 apprentice nukes, that are just in 5 over 5 deeps, I'm trying to get them to about 35 pounds of food for the winter and not 50, just because they're smaller colonies and smaller boxes. There's plenty of people that can overwinter. If you have a really small colony, you could overwinter in a 5-frame deep, just a single deep, with maybe 2 frames of bees, and you can get that through the winter. And obviously, you're not going to put 35 pounds of food into that colony. But in general, if you have generally about 40 to 50 pounds of food is what they need to survive the winter. I can get 40 or 50 pounds of food into a single 10-frame deep box. That's why I choose to run single deeps, because I know a single deep can have 40 or 50 pounds of food into it, and with management, I can get that through the winter. The bees are healthy. Check mite counts or treat it universally. It's kind of getting late in the season, honestly, to do much about your mites. If you haven't done anything about your mites, or what you've done hasn't been effective, which is my case in some hives, and the mite counts are high, you could oxalic acid vaporize them. You can throw an Apivar now, but the effects are pretty much done because the brood rearing is coming to an end. And if your mite levels have been high and your viruses have been high, and it's the middle of October, more than likely that colony is not going to survive the winter because there's been too many mites and there's too much illness in that hive. You may not see it, or you may see it if you're experienced, but again, it doesn't hurt to always try to lower your mite levels. But the effectiveness of doing it now is surely a lot less than doing it earlier in the season. That's what I'm doing this weekend. Am I going to have 100% winter survival? No. I know that coming in for a variety of different reasons. But that's my goal. My goal is to have less than 10% win or loss, and if I can achieve that, then that's what we're all trying to do. We're all trying to keep our bees alive and healthy. Questions on anything that, so the question was, when do you go from 1 part water to 1 part sugar in your syrup to 2 parts sugar to 1 part water? And I would say now. The bees have to dehydrate that syrup to get through winter, and the more concentrated it is, the less work to do that. So I think right now is 2 to 1. Now with 2 to 1, you do have to heat your water to get it into 2 to 1 generally. So whether or not you're going to do that on your kitchen sink, or whether or not you're going to do it with a propane. I do it with a propane burner. There's other ways to do it, but you're generally going to have to heat that water to get that into solution. So now's a good time to go 2 to 1 on your feeds for sure.
George, it's me, Diane.
Hello, Diane.
If you have a single deep and you have mostly 25 to 30 pounds of stores, does that keep the queen from laying even in the springtime if they don't? Because she has nowhere to lay if you have that much supplies on hand.
I mean, I think that's a good question. So the bees are going to consume, obviously they're going to consume the honey or the sugar water through the winter, right? So pretty much once forage done, which is pretty much now, the colony is going to continue to lose weight. Even if they're not making brood, just to generate heat, they're going to lose weight. The colonies generally lose about 5 pounds a month until brood rearing starts. So in November, they're going to be down 5 pounds. December, they're going to be down 5 pounds. January, they're going to be down 5 pounds. And pretty much the end of January to the start of February is when brood rearing starts to kick in again. And at that point, the colony loses about 15 pounds a month until the nectar flow starts. And that can be middle of March, end of March, beginning of April. It sort of depends on the weather, right? So ideally, what you want them to do is you want them to start with 50 pounds, use it up, and then when the nectar flow starts, they start storing nectar and the brood rearing. Now, with a single deep, the room for error is less, right? The room for error on having enough food is less. And we can go into that a little bit later. Surely if you have a double deep and you have 100 pounds of sugar syrup or honey on that hive, the odds of that colony running out of resources before the brood rearing starts in February and March is less, right? But that requires either leaving that much honey on the hive or feeding that much sugar syrup to get to that weight, right? Yes. Remember, a deep frame can generally hold about 6 pounds of sugar syrup or honey on it. So if you're running a 10 frame deep, and most of those frames are filled out with honey or sugar syrup, you're probably going to be at 60 or 70 pounds that box, which is probably going to be enough to get to 40 or 50. It's all math. And yeah, the answer to your question, and the queen is going to have room to lay because through the winter, they're going to eat up that honey or sugar syrup to open up space for the queen to lay coming out of winter.
Do you add supplements to your mixture, your sugar mixture?
My goal is to not need to mix up sugar water and feed sugar syrup right now. So my goal is to have most of my hives with enough honey on them to survive the winter. If I'm mixing up 2 to 1 sugar syrup, I'm not personally putting supplements into like Hive Alive or Rocket Fuel, or there's a couple of brand names out there that you can add to your sugar syrup, which basically have essential oils and salts and stuff like that. I don't personally use them. I don't think supplementing your sugar syrup with essential oils or things like that is necessarily harmful. I think the evidence to say that it's helpful is minimum, honestly. So, and we can go down to, you can get into a discussion of, is it better to leave honey, or is it better to harvest the honey and feed back sugar water, or is it better to leave the honey and minimize your sugar water feed? Yeah, that's an hour discussion in of itself. Personally, I choose, and the reason why I choose to do it because I'm lazy and I don't feel like mixing up sugar water. So I kind of try to get the bees to leave as much honey as possible, and I think it's best. I can't prove it to you, but I think it's there for a reason. And like we all know, there's 80 to 100 things in honey. That's why we all love honey, and that's why we think honey is healthy for us. And it must be similar for the bees.
My question was, actually, you were saying about putting 35 to 50 pounds of sugar or something on top. You could do that every month, correct? I mean, you don't have to put that much all at once. You could maybe 1 month throw on 10 pounds or whatever, 15 pounds. They're not going to eat 50 pounds in 1 month. So, every month, maybe just go in.
At some point, we're not going to be able to feed sugar syrup, which is basically the end of this month, beginning of next month. And you're going to have so much honey or sugar syrup stored on the hive, right? And eventually, hopefully not, but the hive may use all that up, and then you need to supplement with more fondant or sugar bricks or something like that. And that goes on the top of the hive. And you don't have to, you could put 30 pounds of fondant all at once, but you could also do it 5 to 10 pounds, 5 to 10 pounds, 5 to 10 pounds.
What do you mean? You mentioned shake your bees out. What does that mean? Take your hive if it's small and shake them out and let them find a new home?
Pretty much. If you have a really small colony that doesn't have a queen and you want those bees to sort of live their natural life out, just shake them out and they'll end up in another colony, assuming they're not sick, right? So if it's small because it's sick with some terrible disease, you probably don't want to shake them out. But they probably will just drop to the ground anyway if they're sick, honestly. Your ultimate beekeeping behavior is based on your perspective and your desired outcomes. None of our perspectives are the same. None of our desired outcomes are the same. So how we beekeep is going to be different, and that's okay. Thanks, Donna.